right. So how do we kick off our pilot episode here?
This is episode 0. That seems like the right. This is the prototype for what may be a podcast that will happen.
What may be one? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
My name is Rocko Jerome.
And I'm Jeremy Hicks.
And we are sitting in Brian's home. That wasn't a fart. That was just the sound of a mic thing moving. We're sitting in Brian's home, and we are wearing headgear. We got earphones. We got microphones in front of us.
Is our headgear sponsored by Beats, or is this?
I don't know. I don't want to take it off to look because I'm afraid of messing
same.
something up.
Yeah, same here.
I got a control panel next to me. Feels important. So when Brian suggested that we do this, myself being a ham, immediately said, yes, let's do this. Sounds great. And then I looked over at you, and you seemed hesitant. And then it occurred to me that it makes sense that you would be hesitant because I've gotten you into a lot of stuff over the years. That one of the things that I've really been thinking about in having this conversation is just that, we're not old guys, but we're sliding into middle age.
Right.
And we've known each other since we were much younger guys.
Yeah, I guess roughly about a decade now, right?
Yeah. And what always occurs to me is the older you get, and maybe this is true for women as well, I'm not sure, but it's definitely true for men. Friendships are something you have to work at in a different way when you're an adult and you're a man and you're a guy. No,
I agree with that.
It takes a certain kind of maintenance.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I don't know about you, but I'm not very good at that.
Yeah.
Especially as I've gotten older. I
Right.
think it was somewhere around 30 for me, interestingly enough, right about the time that we met. And I just kind of started purposefully cutting people out of my life.
Yeah.
And coupled with that, I've never been very good at keeping up with people.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, it's not purposeful.
Right.
It just happens.
It requires maintenance and work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get busy with life in general, work, relationships.
Yeah.
And things fall by the wayside.
They do. So the story is that you and I were pretty tight for a while during a period where I was working at Barnes & Noble. I can go ahead and name it now because I don't work there anymore. And there's no chance I'm going back, baby. So I can say what I need to say. I worked at Barnes & Noble for a really long time, 11 years, which is a long time to do anything, especially to work in a retail position.
Yeah.
And you were a guy who would come in and you had good things to say.
Yeah, it was, it's just one of those things where you meet someone and there's, you were picking up what I was putting down and vice versa.
Right, yeah. And the deal was I ran the music department.
Yeah.
And I did it like it was my own store.
Yeah. Took a lot of pride.
And I worked really hard to force them to make money, too. Was always sort of the thing. Because, they would have planograms or whatever. And I'd say, you know what? Instead of putting the $20 Celine Dion new CD that has no hits and no buzz right here, I'm going to put this Frank Sinatra album that's $8 that I happen to know we make like $6 per on each one of these that we sell. And I'm going to sell 50 of those in a month. And they would eventually get to the point where they would let me do those things. But I would deal with people that would come in. And when you work in retail, especially at a place like that, you basically have to work with the public on their terms. There's a lot of wear and tear in that kind of job. But when I look back then, it's funny because it's almost like you're a different person sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't know if you get that sense, but you look back. And I think the first thing that I talked you into doing was doing like some sort of a radio interview of me, right? Or was that your idea?
No, I think it was a mutually beneficial deal, because where I was at in life was I'd left graduate school at Morehead State, had moved to Louisville, and had been here for a couple of years, and was doing freelance work for PRX, the Public Radio Exchange, and my background's in journalism, and even despite being out of journalism now for a number of years, I'll still hear things that, it's a good idea for a story. Right. So that's sort of always on, even though I'm no longer in the field. And so we were talking, and you had put this album out with Greg Maddox.
Greg Maddox.
Yeah, you'd put this album out with Greg Maddox, and you were selling copies of it at the store.
Right.
And so I was like, all right, I'm looking for story ideas. You've collaborated with this guy.
Yeah.
This guy who a lot of people may or may not know was a big part of the Louisville music scene.
Yeah, and very talented as well.
This kind of eccentric guy.
Yeah.
And you yourself being an eccentric guy in your own right.
Right.
So took the album, listened to it, and then we met.
It was a concept album about the documentary Scared Straight.
Yeah.
Which has no marketing potential at all.
But still, not a lot of concept albums about.
I believe that's the only one. I think it might be the only concept album about a documentary. It's certainly the only concept album about that documentary.
Yeah.
If you've never heard of Scared Straight, I urge you to. This is for the listeners. Not look up the MTV show, but look up the original Scared Straight from 1978, because it is an incredible thing that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just leave it at that. That way it'll be intriguing to people to listen to it. So please continue.
Yeah. But we got together at Flanagan's, and I interviewed you for the story,
right.
and then put a piece together based on the interview that we had, and then incorporated snippets of the album into it.
Yes.
And then that led to doing a piece on Greg as well.
Right.
Yeah.
But there was one that was just me. Right?
Yes.
Because I also had my own CD out, and the CD was made up of, I don't play any instruments, and I sing fair to middling, to be fair.
You were always modest.
Well, within reason. But and I made the CD, and it was the most half-assed thing you could fathom. It was all made out of Xerox paper and just burned CDs.
I remember that.
And it was basically bands that I had been in where I talked to other people into playing instruments and having me yell over it.
It was sort of a Rocko retrospective.
It was, yeah, right. Now, what kind of a person does something like that? Puts out their own greatest hit CD. So, had you talked to me about that? I don't recall. Maybe it was your idea.
We did not do a piece on that.
Are you sure? I thought there was one that was just me.
No. Well, it was. I just interviewed you about the project with Greg.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, then I'm being a little bit too hard on myself then in this one. Yeah. I had remembered that I had just made you do that on my behalf. So, okay, then that's not quite as bad as I was remembering it. So I should be a little bit easier on myself with that one. And then the next thing was a 48-hour film festival.
Yes.
With some folks.
Yeah.
And that turned out to be a major shit show.
Well, it did, not because of anything that we necessarily
I didn't do it, but still, and you were in a situation where, looking back, it would have been better for me and nicer for me as a person, but I didn't have the tools to do it at the time, to have said, listen, man, this is tore it from the floor up. You don't have to do this.
Well, my thing at the time, I guess sort of a half-assed personal philosophy at the time, and I was just saying this to my wife before I left the house, was the idea at the time, and still to a certain extent, or else I wouldn't be here tonight, is I've always tried to go with what would make the better story.
Right.
So at the time,
Yeah.
you were like, hey, and I had already met some of these cats
Right.
through you. We had already hung out with some of these people, so I knew.
And these weren't horrible people, but
No,
they
not-
were eccentric in ways that were not pleasant.
Well, I mean,
Pushy, the creative like whatever you imagine, for those at home, whatever you imagine to be sort of like the pushy creative artiste, like we were dealing with more than one of those.
Sure. And, I mean, and that's anytime you get together with people to collaborate on something. Everyone has ideas. Everyone wants to, throw their hat in the ring, so to speak. And so we got to witness that firsthand. And again, I was on board with it because I was like, well, never been a part of anything like this. So, let's do it just for the sake of the story.
Right.
And there was certainly some interesting things
that
came out of it.
And, I mean, like, it ended up being a little short movie that's probably one of the best things that I've ever done in terms of these little things that I've acted in. It's called Science. No, it's not. Science Fair is a different one. Science Fair is good. It's totally separate from this. Look that up if you want.
Was that a 48-hour film entry?
It
as
was.
well?
That was a later one. The one
with the same people?
No.
Okay.
Oh, gosh, no. No. Look it up. It's called. God damn, what is it called? I forget what the thing was called.
I don't remember the title, but I remember it being like parentheses, something story. Something is.
I can't.
Penultimate was maybe in the title.
It was. No, I don't think so. Gosh, I can't believe I don't remember. I should have done more research. Maybe don't bother to look it up. Anyway, it was a rough day, and I was in the movie a lot, and I had to fight to be, because the people that were sort of taking over. It's so ridiculous when you consider that this is just a movie they showed at the Village 8 once on a Thursday with a bunch of other crappy movies.
Well, I mean,
how much like just ire went into the process of making that thing.
Well, again, a lot of passionate people,
Right.
Questionably creative people
Yeah.
come together to do something, and I think that I have no doubt that the 48-hour film people just thrive on that.
Yeah,
because
sure.
I mean, it's the passion that comes out of that is arguably what makes the finished product.
Yeah.
And in this case, it just wasn't that successful.
Well, yeah. I mean, did you go to see all the movies when they had them, or did you not?
I did not.
Yeah, see? And that's fair of you to not not do that. Because how those things work is you pay money. Even though you're in the thing, you're still paying $7 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you go in to the Village 8 and you watch a movie, actually like 2 hours worth of not very good movies.
Yeah.
That were made by unprofessional filmmakers within 2 days, which sounds really novel and interesting until you actually put yourself through that experience.
Well, and I think that's why I chose not to go to the screening, because I was like, well, I've lived this thing. I don't need to see it.
That's the classic Pee Wee Herman line. Right? So then the next thing that I talked you into doing was work for me, technically for me,
Yes.
at Barnes & Noble during a Christmas season.
Yeah.
And the deal was that I took that job way more. Now that I don't have that job anymore and I've gone on to do other things that I feel like are more worthy of my efforts, I feel like Alec Guinness and Bridge on the River Kwai. You ever seen that movie?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You just feel like it was futile?
Yeah. Bridge on the River Kwai is a movie about a guy who, what was he, like I guess he was some sort of a major or something.
Even for the British Army.
Right. And he's a prisoner of war, and the Japanese make him build a bridge that they're going to carry all their troops and stuff over. And he gets his pride all wrapped up in it.
Despite being a POW.
Right. And he basically goes to all this trouble and makes his men give their very best British effort to build this bridge. And then when it starts to become time for the Allied guys to come in and blow up the bridge, he actually fights them, right? Instead of saying, this is not okay that I built this. It's one thing that I had to do it because I had to. It's another thing entirely to then sacrifice your relationships with people.
Well, I think you're being entirely way too hard on yourself. I mean, you'd been with this company for a number of years.
Right.
You spearheaded that department. Again, you took a lot of pride in your work. I have at times been a very selfish man and have made very selfish decisions.
Right.
And we never talked about me leaving. So this is,
We actually did. You don't remember that?
I remember I stopped in one night and you kind of gave me the cold shoulder.
Did I?
Yeah, that was kind of my memory of it. But and you were sort of dismissive of or at least that was my interpretation of it.
Well, let's tell the story of what happened since we're actually doing this for radio.
So
a couple of weirdos.
I'm interested to hear your side of things.
Sure. Okay. Do you want to hear mine first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So the deal was, and this is now, I'll try to talk about this the way that I looked at it then, and then the way that I look at it now.
Fair.
As a
Fair
more
enough.
evolved person. So I was in a situation where I did not have the staff that I needed, especially for Christmas, because Christmas is crazy. You do like 40% of your whole year's business in November and December. It's nuts. And so, they always say, don't hire your friends to work for you. And I was like, well, I'll just hire some friends of mine, and I only need them for 2 months. What's the big deal? What could go wrong? These guys are my friends. We're all brothers here. And I just need them for a couple months. So it was you and 3 other guys, and only one of those guys was still around by the final week of December.
Are you serious? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, that was part of why it was so sort of hard on me, right? Because the only guy who stuck around is a guy named Billy Mask, who's a very good friend of mine still. And
I remember Billy.
Yeah, he had worked at the store before, and I had another guy who was like, I'll never forget. There was one guy who, he was like, he was a hard worker, maybe not great with people, but good at like doing like alphabetizing and all that kind of stuff that needs to be done that I've never been particularly passionate about.
Sure.
But he had tattoos on his hands, and he's just kind of one of those guys who like never quite figured out that you don't say what's up, bitch, to the waitress kind of guy. You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't understand that you don't take off your shoes at somebody's house if they don't say you should take off your shoes. Like, just kind of like doesn't know which fork and knife to use kind of a guy. Right. And he had tattoos on his hands, which meant that his opportunities to get hired for especially retail jobs are limited. They just are. I'm sorry. That's just what the world is like.
Do you still feel like that's the case?
In the world?
Yeah.
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 Pretty much. And that's not my rule. If it was up to me, whatever. But the reality is, a guy with tattoos all over his hands, people are going to be weirded out by it. People in upper management, customers. It's going to lead to a lot of conversations that you don't want to have. But I remember that he was like, man, I can't even afford to eat, man. Like, I'm not making enough money. So I went and bought this guy because I wanted to keep him because he was good, more or less.
Yeah.
I bought him a bunch of TV dinners, and I put them in the refrigerator at work. And I said, man, look, a bunch of banquet meals are back there in the break room. They're for you. And he was like, oh, man, thanks, but I can't eat them, man, because I'm a vegan. Right? And it's just like, oh, my gosh.
Beggars can't be choosers.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, well, man, I don't know what to tell you. And so there was that dude, and there was another guy who like had like 3 kids, and he was also working at like Circuit City, and like a smart, high achieving guy academically.
Yeah.
But just, I think maybe he's better now, but like financially he was not not with it, and he had a lot going on. There was one day that guy even like he fell asleep when he was like heating up the baby's bottle, and it caught on fire, and he almost burned the house. Something did. He fell asleep, and it went bad, and he came to work like bleary eyed and weird immediately after that. He was like, "Oh man, I hope I can make it through today, man," because that's actually a really good impersonation of that guy too. It's too bad he's not a famous person and nobody knows how good this impersonation is. He was like, "I really hope I can make it through today, man, because that was rough, man. It was rough, bro." And I'm like, "Okay, well, you're on Register 9 today. Let's have fun."
He's one of those bro guys, huh?
Yeah, kind of a bro, I guess.
Yeah.
Smarter than not like. I don't want to paint him as he's obviously not here to defend himself, and he's a good guy. So and who knows what he's like now? His kids are teenagers now, probably. So
I remember Billy.
Yeah,
and I believe the guy you're talking about, maybe kind of a stockier guy.
Yeah.
So I sort of remember him in passing, and and the guy with the tattoos, I sort of remember in passing as well.
So I was like, okay, well, this is like a plane that's kind of like taking some hits, but we're going to try to go and bring it into the Christmas pass and land it safely, And, I mean, depending on how well we performed. So also another thing, too, if you never worked in retail, and if you never worked in retail at a job where you gave a shit, and you never worked in retail during Christmas at a job where you gave a shit, you are not as fully formed a person as you should be.
So
Honestly,
you're saying there's something to be said of people who have cut their teeth in retail.
Yeah, I really believe that.
Yeah.
I really believe that. I think there's a lot of things that you understand about capitalism and how much capitalism drives everything in this country. You understand a lot of things about people and how both cruel and kind they can be.
You really see the best and the worst of people.
You do. And you see how removed people are from their senses so much of the time. And like when you look at the state of the world and how frankly horrible it is right now, when I think about all the time that I worked in retail and the people that I encountered and the fact that those people can all vote, they all have access to firearms, they all have access to booze, they can get drugs. It's amazing that the world is not a lot worse off than it is, in my estimation, from things that I saw working in retail for as long as I did.
And this is just what you and I have seen at like a Barnes and Noble.
Right.
Imagine the kind of people you interact with when you work fast food.
Right.
I mean, have you ever worked fast food?
Gosh, no.
Yeah, me either.
Absolutely not.
So, I mean, there's probably something to be said for people who have worked fast food and survived that.
Yeah, I have done grocery work, and that came after Barnes and Noble, and it was short-lived because that's another story. But that was more of the rank and file human beings, and it's a lot worse.
The real quick, the very first job I ever had was a gas station attendant, and I was 17 years old, and that was tough.
Imagine.
Yeah.
Imagine that's really... So everybody should do that, because I really do feel like... I mean, it's funny because you can talk to people and you can actually sort of say, either out loud or to yourself, this is a person who has never worked retail. I can tell from the way that they treat, just the way that they think the world is.
Yeah.
Right? Until you're forced to talk to strangers one after the other, you really don't know what people are capable of. But anyway, so you had already worked at Borders, and you were quite burned out on that experience, as I recall.
Yes, I had. While I did not manage the music department at Borders, I primarily worked in the music department there.
Yeah, I remember one time that I was talking to you on the phone while you were in the music department, and we were talking about whatever we were talking about.
Was this when I was at Borders or at Barnes
Borders?
and Noble? Okay.
We were at Borders, and somebody apparently had come down from management because you were like, "Yeah, man, I do think Hellboy's a really great comic book." Yeah, it looks like that's going to be $12.99 if you want to order it, and if you want to order it, we'll get it for you in just 4 days. Okay, thanks so much. And then you hung up the phone. And then you called me back like 10 minutes later and you were like, I guess you fucking know what that was. I'm a grown man and I have to do this shit. Right? So now, being hopefully more of an empathetic person than I was then, I would know this is a guy who doesn't want to work in retail. You shouldn't try to guilt him into it and talk him into it. He doesn't want to do it. But at the time, when I was a guy wearing leather wristbands and sideburns and Hawaiian shirts all the time and wearing my hair all duded up, I was a rock star. And I was like, hey, man, it's ride or die. Come on. So I don't know what the process was of me getting you to decide to work there. But it's not something that was in your best interest. And it was not something that you wanted to do, surely. And insult to injury, they told you, I don't know if you remember this. If I were you, I would never forget this. They told you were going to make like 75 cents more an hour than you were.
Right.
And then you got hired and you got your first paycheck. And nobody had a good answer for that.
Right. And that, it's interesting that you remember that. I actually did not expect you to remember that.
Oh, yeah.
But that was one of the deciding factors for me to just kind of throw the towel in.
Yeah. I've got a big catcher's mitt inside of my head. And you know what it catches? Injustice. And I remember things. So they happen to me or somebody else, man.
Well, a couple of things real quick. One, I think you're being, again, too hard on yourself as far as dragging me into this. We had a rapport. I had worked in the music department at Borders and had worked in a couple of independent record stores in college. Music, a big part of my life still to this day. So it's not like it wasn't something that I didn't know. So I knew what I was getting into to a certain extent.
Right.
And, for what it's worth, the reason that I left had nothing to do with you, and I hope you know that.
Oh, no, I know.
Yeah. But
at the time, I'm not sure I did.
Yeah. So with that said, just to kind of, and I'm not trying to justify my actions, but where I was at in my life at the time was...
Well, let's say what happened.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Do you want to give your perspective? Or...
Well,
I don't know how well you remember it.
So what was going on was that, again, let me throw this in real quick. I was at a point in my life where I was trying to do more work with the Public Radio Exchange. Right. And what had happened was that I was having to supplement my income with all these side jobs in order to keep that afloat. So I was frustrated because things were not going the way that I had hoped they would with being an independent producer reporter. So I'm having to take these side jobs at Borders, Barnes & Noble. I was working for a textbook wholesaler in Versailles. Yeah.
I know it seemed like a really far out job.
Yeah, and so you had mentioned that there was going to be this agreed upon hourly wage, and so sure enough, that did not come to pass. Yeah. Now, my memory may be a little fuzzy here, but I too don't remember really being given a good explanation, and I wasn't upset with you about that. Obviously, you didn't determine how much I made,
right?
And
no,
so
I had no control whatsoever over any of that.
And so I show up for work one morning.
Yeah. Saturday before Christmas, which is at Barnes & Noble, that's bigger than anything. It's bigger than Black Friday or any of those.
Yeah. So show up.
Put that out there.
So store opens at 10. I get there maybe 9:30, quarter till 10. Yeah. And
they don't have a buzzer.
Right.
You got to click on the glass to try to get somebody's in this huge box store.
Yeah.
Somebody somewhere is supposed to hear that. And then get the attention of a manager, because they're not allowed to do it, to go and unlock the door and let you in.
Yeah.
As if it's Fort Knox.
So I get there for my shift and knock on the door.
Tap on the glass.
Nobody's coming. Nobody's coming.
Yeah.
Can't you hear me knocking? So I was just at a point in my life and for better or worse, I've burnt many bridges over the years.
Yeah.
And so in spectacular fashion,
Yeah.
I can't remember it. It probably wasn't even really that long. It was just the point that nobody was coming to the door to let me in.
The principle of the matter, sure.
So I see this lady
Yeah.
out in the parking lot sitting in her car.
Yeah.
And so I walk over there and I smile at her, and she rolls her window down, and I say, hi, are you going to go in the store when they open at 10? And she was like, yeah, I'm here to, probably said something like, I'm here to do some Christmas shopping.
Yeah.
I said, well, great. When you go in, tell them that Jeremy said he quits. And she was like, oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
And
I never heard that part.
And sure enough, she followed through with it.
Oh, my gosh.
And so I call my boss in Versailles.
Yeah.
And I say, hey, I just quit this Barnes and Noble gig. Can you use me today? And he's like, yeah, of course. Come on in.
And then he went and made $50 that day, probably.
And so on my way,
which is more than he would have made at Barnes.
And so on my way to Versailles, our boss calls us, and she's like, hey, this lady tells me that you just quit. And I was like, well, I showed up for my shift like I always do, and nobody was there to let me in. I was like, I got this other gig. I can go here, and, I can make more money doing this.
Yeah.
And, she was like, well, there's nobody really to cover your shift. And I was like, well, fuck it, I quit.
Wow.
And
did you say "fuck it, I quit"?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And that was that.
Right.
And so
worst possible day for that to happen.
So caught up in my own in my own just misery. Did not think about the repercussions.
Right.
Did not think about how it would affect you.
Yeah, and how that affected me was, so we would have someone that would work the day shift, and then they would then leave at 3:00, and you have a night shift person, and then the money comes during that mid shift, which is like 11 to whatever, 11 to 7, 12 to 8, and that would be when I would come in and let whoever was less into the job and less knowledgeable about the product and willing to grease the wheels would run the register, and I would go out front and I would do my thing. And that day made a lot of difference. So like somebody would have to be there to, do what I was doing, but since you didn't make it that day, I got a phone call, and I had to, and they were always very conscientious and worried about anybody going into overtime, which is right away that's a red flag. During Christmas time, they should probably go ahead and pay somebody the extra time and a half, a couple of days,
right, rather
than sweat it out and somebody lose a bonus over it or whatever. So I got a call and I had to go in, and like now looking back at it, there was days towards the end of my run there. And it wasn't my idea to leave, and I didn't do anything to cause it to happen. It came from corporate. Corporate cut out all of the music managers. Even though I was the only person making money in that store with my department, every other department wasn't beating plan. I was beating plan. Too bad. Corporate deal. You gotta go. Now looking back at it, it's just like, gosh, that was what my life was. Like, you can't have your pudding because you haven't had enough meat. Like, it was that kind of thing of just like, you're like indoctrinated in this system, and this is what your identity is, and this is what your job is. So, I I understood, it made sense to me why it would, there was many mornings where I just put up with it, where I'd be tap on the glass and just waiting to catch somebody's attention.
Right.
But you as somebody who was from outside of the circle and had other things and were already thinking like I think now about angles and ways that you can go out and make money and things that you can do and have your own identity and not have it tied to some corporate entity. Like you had the right idea. Like I should have left that job a lot earlier than I did. But did I call you about it or did I just let it ride?
Oh, you just let it ride.
Yeah. Also, I feel like I'm talking a lot more.
No, you're fine.
it it's really emotionally exhausting working in that type of job during the holiday season too, because there's so many people coming in, and it's just like it's one of those things where, again, if you've never done that, you don't understand, especially at a place like that where you're dealing with people that are kind of a little questionable mentally, and they want a piece of you. You know?
High highs, low lows. I mean, there would be somebody who would come in and was wanting something, and it would, it was just the perfect gift for this person.
Right.
And if you had it, you could just absolutely make this person's day.
Or figure out what the fuck they were talking about. That was always good. If they didn't know and they knew 2 words of a song.
Yeah. If you didn't have what they were looking for, you could just absolutely just crush someone. Yeah. So I mean, you're right. High highs.
And just lows. That, and just so much of that. And I was really good at it, and I was really into multitasking. So I would routinely, and I took a lot of pride in this, I'd have like a customer that I'm talking to on the phone, I'm ringing somebody up in front of me, and there's also somebody to the other side of me who I'm looking something up. And I could do it all at one time. And in the little breaks in between, I could do the other thing. And people would watch me do it and just be like, because I was really good at it. It was a thing that I was really good at. And it was rewarding enough for long enough that I went ahead and rode with it.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed my time in retail over the years. I'll be honest with you, I don't know if I could do it now.
Yeah, no, I never want to do it again.
But with that said, again, I've burnt a lot of bridges over the years in similar fashions, and I think for me. I'm a very flawed man, and
everybody,
and something that I'm guilty of is that I will let things build to a point, and then will usually just end things in spectacular fashion.
Right. Yeah.
And this is a great example of me doing that. I'd like to think I've gotten better at that as I've gotten older. But it's just it was frustrating at the time because, again, the independent producer reporter work wasn't going as well as I wanted.
Right.
I was having to take these jobs in order to supplement that. You have an idea about the direction that your life is going to go in, and when it's not going in that direction, you tend to just lash out at things.
Right. Sure.
So, 75 cents an hour, somebody not coming to the door to let me into work, while those things were arguably disappointing, my actions that day didn't have anything really to do with that as much as it did, which is being frustrated with life in general.
Right, sure. Well, and also, too, you were talking about your aspirations in radio and stuff. Since then, I have started to get work as a writer and getting paid to do that.
I was thinking about that actually before we came in. I was thinking how the script has kind of flipped with us. Like at the time, I was a journalist,
right.
and have gotten out of that field while you very much are immersed in it now. Yeah.
Well, and I think what that does to a person. Because I'm a guy who likes comforts, and I'm a creature of habits, and I don't like things to change if they're not bothering me. And sometimes the definition of not bothering me is maybe a little bit more open than it should be. But
what do you mean by that?
Well, like working at Barnes and Noble for so long.
Oh, I see.
And not having a cell phone. Like, I was, really adamant about not having a cell phone. And I didn't need one because I was there at the store. If you want to talk to me, just come to the store and talk to me. I'm there for 8 hours every day. And then my friends, it would inconvenience my friends, who I now realize just how much they loved me, to be willing to, fuck, we really want to leave this place and go to another place. But Rocko's not here yet, and he doesn't have a cell phone, so we have to wait for him. That kind of thing. And I'd show up and everybody's been out shit. I'm like, what's everybody mad about? I don't know. Or even the act of calling a person now. Now if my phone rings, if you call me, I'm thinking it's an emergency. And if you call me and don't leave a message, I think somebody's dead, right? Because culture has moved in such a direction that it's texts.
Oh, yeah.
And it just is. And I was adamant about not doing it. I was like, no, I don't know. I just don't feel like, no, and I'm just going to work at this bookstore for 11 years because it's comfortable and it's easy, and I'm just going to do this. Whereas when you start to do work, and the push and pull of that is that you put a little bit of yourself into it.
Oh, sure.
Right? When you write something or when you do a radio thing or whatever, and then you're selling it to someone who then has the right to say, let's move these sentences around, or let's talk more about that. And you have to do it if you want to do it. But at any rate, you're sort of striking out on your own in a way that's very different than just working for the man in some capacity. And I think it does do something to your head. I think it kind of changes your perception of where your money comes from and what of yourself you're giving.
Sure.
Of that. No, I don't know. I don't really know. I don't know that I was like angry at you. I don't think I was ever like mad, like fucking asshole. I was hurt that out of the 4 of you guys, 3 of you fucked me. like it was really just like, man, like none of those guys could make it to the, and I was actually harder on the other 2 guys than I was on you.
Well, what happened with the other 2 guys?
One of the guys was like, hey bro, you got the other guys, you're going to be fine. That was the vegan guy. And I was like, oh, okay. No, you'll be fine, man. I don't even know what happened to him. I really don't. And then the other guy was like, yeah, man, I can work that night. And then he kept like doing things like almost burning his house down. And he came in one day and he was the one I was hardest on. He was like, man, look, man, I can't work tomorrow. And it was like going to be like my one day off. And I had to work like 1 or 2 days. And he quit. He had to quit because he was like, I'm not sick. I don't have any vacation time. I just can't work.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, man. This is something I think I did a lot back then that I don't want to do now because it's very passive aggressive and shitty. But I remember having the schedule, like crossing him off of it, like, and being like, all right, man. Fine. And he said to me,
while he was standing there.
Yeah. And he said to me, man, look, man, I am so sorry. I don't do this. And I just looked at him and I let it be as pregnant as I could let it be and just let it have a couple beats. And then I said, apparently you are. And then I just turned my back like it was a movie. And I just kind of heard him like dejectedly shuffle away.
The sad Peanut song
Yeah.
plays as he walks away.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he probably still is, I mean, he was trying to do what he could and he just overextended himself, which is something that I think all of us have done.
Sure.
Surely. But I was way too hard on him about it, and if you're listening, sorry. I'm not going to say your name because that'd be kind of fucked up if I put your name out there. But you know who you are. But no, I don't know. And then you came back around, and it was funny because when you came back around, it was long enough later that I was no longer really mad. Like I wasn't like it wasn't like, oh, this guy.
It was a couple of years.
Was it really? A couple of years?
Yeah, because shortly after that, I took a job in Lexington, which led to a job back at my alma mater, and which led to a job back in Louisville.
Right.
So there was a lot of things were in flux in that period. So I finally settled into a gig back in Louisville, and for whatever reason, a couple years later, decided, you know what, I'm gonna stop in and see Rocko.
Yeah.
See if Rocko's still around.
And there I was.
And there you were.
Still chained to the register. I remember that we talked for a while, and the reason that I know that is that there was a girl who came in who was mad at me about something.
Like a girl who worked there?
She had worked there, but she was mad at me about something else entirely. and I didn't want to talk to her. And it was very good that you were there, because do you remember that at all?
You know, if I'm recalling this correctly, like she just kind of came in and was like being all coy about stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
and I didn't want to talk to her at all.
Like she was sort of acting like she was looking at CDs, but very clearly wasn't there to shop.
Yeah, she was there to fuck with me.
Right.
And I was in the middle of something. So that's part of why I remember that day especially. And that used to happen to me a lot. There were a lot of people that would, in some cases rightly, but most of the time wrongly, decide that they had a bone to pick with me, and they would come in there and they'd start shit. I mean, it's crazy. It's a weird deal. It's hard to even imagine. But I remember it being that it was good to talk to you. That I don't remember anything specifically that we talked about. I do remember that you apologized. I should have apologized too. I don't know if I did.
I don't recall that you did, but again, I don't think you really had anything to apologize for.
Yeah, I feel that I do, and I do apologize, because that was and I wouldn't. I did things in a shitty way then, but the past is a foreign country, and they did things differently then. Which is who said that?
I'm sorry?
That was a quote that somebody said that the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. I don't know. But anyway, whoever said that, you should Google that if you're at home. And, leave a comment.
Somewhere.
Yeah, something should happen. Yeah, just comment something. But yeah, and a lot of it just sort of, it goes into, and so let's bring it up to today. You and I both shop at the same comic shop now, Destination.
Yeah.
And you've been doing that for a while. I'm new there because Doug Adams, the guy who was sort of the Johnny Carson of Louisville comic book store guys, retired. He used to run Comic Book World. So I needed a new place to go, and these guys are kind of the Conan O'Brien, I would say. There's not really any David Letterman in this situation.
No, I think that's a good analogy.
Right.
And for what it's worth, I mean, I think that this is probably going to reek of us like plugging the Destination, and I don't think that's either one of our intention.
Mm-hmm.
But with that said, I think it really says something, because you shopped at Comic Book World since you were a kid.
Since I was a child, yeah. I was 12 years old when they first opened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was what, early 80s?
No, it was when he opened, it was like late 80s, 90s.
Okay.
But he wasn't nice to me as a kid at all. Like, it was funny because I was into cool shit for it. This was like the age of Image guys. And I was into like Alan Davis and Will Eisner. And I would come in there, I want to buy like Spirit and Captain Britain stuff. And he treated me like the scum of the earth. Like, he didn't want anything to do with me. And then it was only, I didn't do comics for a while because things got shitty in my appraisal. And I kind of dipped a toe back in. And when I came back as an adult, he was like, "What have you been reading? What's been going on?" And then we were very good friends after that. Or friendly, you know.
I did not know Doug that well. He was, Comic Book World was a solid number 3 shopping destination for me. But I always enjoyed talking to him because he seemed to watch a lot of the same things that I watched.
Yeah, he mainly, now that he's retired, he's mainly watching television.
Yeah,
it's true. That's what he's into. He's more than happy to tell you, and that's what he's doing.
Yeah,
he's catching up on TV shows.
I used to work for a certain information data gathering company.
Another one, yeah.
Who utilizes data that's collected from people who watch television.
Yeah.
And he talked my head off about that once he found out that I used to work for them.
Yeah.
And was like, "Oh well, they would love me because I'm DVRing this and I'm watching that."
Right.
And, yeah. No, he seemed to be into a lot of the same shows that I watched, same films, comics. So
I love the guy.
Yeah.
And I thought he was going to die in there. And it's funny because having my background in retail, a lot of the Comic Book World orphans now, we're sort of like, "Man, I'm so sad he's retiring, and that just makes me so sad." And I'm thrilled for him.
Yeah.
I'm very happy for him and it's very selfish, I think, of those of you that are listening. You should be ashamed. Let Doug be Doug, man. You know, I'm happy for him. Doesn't have to do it anymore.
He's put his time in.
You better believe it. So we were both at the store, and you were hanging around back there, and I was talking to Mitch, and then Mitch was saying your name and stuff, and you and I have the same square name, right? It just turns out that I've never been much of a Jeremy, so I've had nicknames all my life. People have called me other things, and Rocko stuck when I was 18 years old, and I knew better than to fight it. So I'm Rocko for just about everybody. Even my mother doesn't call me Jeremy. You know, it's weird. Yeah, we happened to both be in there, and I didn't really have any trepidation. Did you?
In truth, I recognized you as soon as I walked in.
Right.
And since the last time we saw each other was, maybe, 7, 8 years ago.
Yeah, right.
There had been, you probably didn't realize this, but there had been a couple times where I'd been at Comic Book World and you were there.
Really?
And we just didn't talk.
Wow.
So I really wasn't sure where we stood.
Yeah.
So, I come in and I'm like, all right, got to talk to Mitch about some stuff, got some things to do.
Yeah, because you kind of rolled up and looked at me, and you're talking to Mitch,
and I was
really happy to see you.
And I was like, I recognize Rocko,
sure.
But I don't know if he's going to want to talk or not. So I'm just going to see how this plays out.
You know what's funny about that to me is, you know how you'll be in a place where there's somebody you don't want to talk to, and you see them, and you're like, oh fuck, I don't want to talk to them, and you're like, I really hope that they just don't see me.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Sure. I think that's part of the human experience. And if you've never had that happen, you're a liar. I'll tell you that. But that makes me wonder how many times I've just legit just not been paying attention to my surroundings. And there was somebody who was like, he didn't want to talk to me.
Well, again, I mean, the way that I felt that we left things, there was some ambiguity to it. And so, I was like, when I saw you that day at the destination, I was like, well, I'll see if he recognizes me, because I do not physically, I have altered my appearance
a bit,
since back in the day. So with that said, I was like, I'm going to see how this plays out.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, we just sort of picked up right where we left off.
Right, sure.
Before things ended at Barnes & Noble.
Yeah, well, and when you came in and talked, it's like I remember that you gave me your phone number, but you weren't on social media.
Correct.
And although I haven't been a cell phone guy for very long, I've always been an internet guy. I've always had some sort of online presence.
So even going back to MySpace.
Oh, yeah, I was all over MySpace. I didn't do Friendster, but I did MySpace, and I did Facebook, too. And I remember that you were like, I don't want to give that guy any money. The Facebook guy. What's that guy's?
Mark Zuckerberg?
Yeah, you're like, Mark Zuckerberg doesn't need my money.
I
was like, yeah, you said that.
I said that?
You said those exact words. And I said, it doesn't cost any money. And he was like, well, it's something.
Wow.
Yeah. You said that. So if you had been on Facebook, I would have added you on Facebook, and now we're both on Facebook.
Yes.
So that would have been different right away, because it just sort of automatically puts that person. See, a lot of people hate Facebook. I don't. Facebook is a content-driven website, and the content is your friends. So the problem isn't Facebook if you don't like Facebook.
I think for me, I mean, it doesn't surprise me if that's something that I said all those years ago.
Yeah.
I think for me now, I don't necessarily regret putting off joining Facebook as long as what I did, because I've been on there maybe 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah.
But the cool thing about being on there is that, and it's so simple, and I don't know why I fought it all those years ago, but it's enabled me to interact with people that I don't have an opportunity to see on a regular basis
Yeah.
anymore. And it's interesting because while I don't necessarily see these people in person, it has, I think, renewed a lot of friendships, and I've found things that I have in common with people that I've known all these years, and it wasn't until we interacted online that I realized that we share the same passion for things.
Right, sure.
So I think that's definitely something that is worthwhile in my part as far as social media.
Yeah,
goes.
it's a handy tether. So, but me again being as self-absorbed as I am, with just a little bit more self-awareness now than I had years ago, didn't really think that there would be until the very moment that I thought this could be weird for this fellow human being and my old friend, was when Brian was like, "We need to give you guys a podcast." And I'm like, "Fuck yeah, man, I'm important. Put me in front of a microphone. I got things to say. I want people to hear me." And then I look at you and I'm like, "You don't seem too into this idea." Well, I wonder why that would be. Maybe it's because I've talked him into a bunch of dumb shit.
Well, I think that would be the much cooler answer. Would be, I've had enough of this guy's shenanigans. I'm not getting on board with this. But in truth, in a very serious way, I guess I was apprehensive about it because I'm like, what do we really have to add?
Right.
To to anything.
Well, and there's a million podcasts. Maybe we should call this the 1,000,001st podcast.
Well, I was my when I mentioned this to my wife, it ended up turning this whole big thing. So I was like, yeah, me and Rocko, and she's like, Rocko, and I was like, I've never talked to you about Rocko, and she's like, no, who's Rocko? So then that led to a lot of the things that we've just sat and talked about, me sharing it with her, and then it turned into, well, we're thinking about doing this podcast.
Right.
And the first thing that she said was, am I going to have to listen to it? So, because I mean, for better or worse, she lives with me and has to hear this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So she won't be listening to it.
That's fine.
So we're already down a man.
Okay. Yeah.
But I jokingly said to her, I was like, what are we going to call this thing? Is it going to be, just another podcast?
Yeah.
Or I was at the store on Tuesday night, and at the destination, and Brian brought it up, and somebody was like, do you all have a name for the show? And I was like, no, we haven't. We don't have anything.
Yeah.
It's like we have no social media presence. We don't have a name for the show. We don't have anything.
Right.
We're just this is gonna be a pilot. We'll see how it goes, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Name of the show? And I was like, Two Assholes with a Podcast. Because again, in all seriousness, I worry about what we have to add to the podcasting world because we don't have a format.
Right.
It's just two dudes.
Well, and I've done podcasts and stuff.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. I've done a bunch of different ones. There haven't been any that are just like I'm the driving. I've been the guest.
Oh, I see.
On a number of different podcasts.
I see.
Good ones and bad ones, and I listen to Mark Maron.
Yeah.
A lot, and I'm really into him. I think that it's like, so one of my big things is, and this is something that I did at the store, and this was something that I did in my writing for a long time, and now I do it more on social media than on my own website. But I consider myself to be an agent of the maligned, underappreciated, and underrated for your information, education, and entertainment. So, I feel like if I have an opinion of something that I feel like is very common and has already been stated many times, I'm just not even going to talk about it. But, like for instance, Star Wars is something that I'm sure that we could say things about that I know nobody else is saying because I've heard everybody talk about Star Wars. So I think that you and I, I'll get on the high horse for a moment, have fairly cultivated tastes. And I think that for the things that we are passionate about, we have a lot of interesting things to say, I think.
Well, I know that whenever we get together, there's never a lack of conversation.
No, certainly not.
So I think we certainly have that going for us. Now, whether or not anybody else cares what we have to say, that's
remains to be seen, right?
Right. So if we continue with this, perhaps we should just look at it from the standpoint of, well, who really gives a shit if anybody else is listening?
Yeah.
We do this because we enjoy getting together and talking.
Sounds good.
So,
and then it provides a record for later, so we don't have this Rashomon situation where we don't remember whose fault it was that he didn't show up for work on December 20th, 2000, whatever it was.
Well, I appreciate the Rashomon reference. Always been a big Kurosawa guy.
Yeah.
So Rashomon probably my favorite film of his.
Oh wow! Well, and Robert Evans started his book, which everybody should read. The Kid Stays in the Picture. You know Robert Evans?
No.
Oh my gosh, Robert Evans, Hollywood producer, was pretty much responsible for the transition from the old studio system to the way that things are now, more or less. He was the producer of the Godfather movies, Love Story,
Okay.
Rosemary's Baby. Cool guy, very quotable guy, and he wrote a great book that became a documentary called The Kid Stays in the Picture. And the way that he begins it is he says, there's three sides to every story: my side, your side, and the truth, and nobody's lying. So that sounds like the end of this episode.